So the next talk is by William. Take it away.
All right, so let's get started. My name is William Leese. I have been working at Bolt.com for almost 3 years, I guess. I started out in TAM middleware, which basically all the infrastructure above the compute layer, I would say. And I moved on to SRT retail when we split everything up in spaces. Got bored, no offense, retail people, and moved on to the platform where I worked for a while with Renzo and had lots of fun in the test specialism, I would say, of SRT platform. I pretend to be British. I might have a bit of an accent, sorry about that. I left when I was 12, so I'm not really that British. Been in Holland for a long time now, so I can speak some reasonable Dutch. Lived in Japan for 3 years. I would love to practice my Japanese conversation skills, so if any of you would like to practice, please do. I see someone pointing to Ivan up there, and someone in front of Ivan. So I have 2 wonderful bunnies, rabbits, I would say. They're really cute. I have a beautiful keyboard, which that's arguable, I guess. I like playing Zelda Breath of the Wild and Japan. 2 photos from Japan there. So TESS, what's TESS? TESS is a really strange name, I guess, but basically we do the insights. We provide a platform for monitoring, alerting, for metrics, and for logging, and we allow your applications just to send the metrics to a certain place, the logging, and so on, and make it available through dashboarding, Grafana and Kibana. This year we actually became the stewards of the monitoring solution. Previously, it was part of Tim. So yeah, this talk is mostly about monitoring, just to get you guys up to speed, what we want to be doing with it, and, well, just to get used to presenting about it, I guess. Q&A time, reverse that is. I've got a few questions for you guys. So how many of you have any idea what kind of alerts are configured for application or applications? Let's see a few hands. That's about 1/4, 1/5. How many of you have created your own alerts? That's not as much. All right, so let's have a bit of a talk about alerting, because that's the most important part of insights, basically. But before we do so, let's talk about some terms that we use. As you can see, there are lots of terms we use at Bolt.com, lots of terms the industry uses. Black and white box monitoring. So black box monitoring, is a way of looking from the outside to an object or a service and seeing what the state is and trying to determine if something is healthy or not. So basically, you do not control the black box. You are just on the outside. You're looking at it and seeing if it responds according to your thresholds that you define. White box monitoring, on the other hand, is you control the service. You control the box, software, whatever, and it exports its state to a system, like a metric system, a logging system, hopefully both. And you alert on that. So you determine what kind of metrics does this application output. It's my application, I know what kind of metrics it outputs. And what are the thresholds they have to be in to be healthy? Our company mostly deals with black box monitoring, or at least alerting mostly does that. We look at the infrastructure mostly. And white box monitoring, we don't monitor so much, or we don't alert much on the metrics that we provide, but we do export quite a lot of metrics to our system, which is good because that gives me a job. Functional and technical monitoring. Functional monitoring is something that we've been speaking a bit more about the past 1.5 years, maybe 2 years now, and basically means you are testing to see if your application is actually doing what you wrote it to do. It sounds fairly logical, but apparently we lost track years and years ago, and we aren't doing that. Technical monitoring, on the other hand, something we do a lot, is you just look if the infrastructure is okay, if the environment around the software is okay, is the software actually running, does the operating system see a process? So that's a very limited way of monitoring, very naive way of monitoring. It wouldn't be a coincidence to say that most of our alerting has been set up by SRT people or middleware people is black box monitoring because they did not write the software. So metrics and logging, I'm pretty sure everyone understands the difference, but let's just explain it a bit just to understand why we'd prefer one or the other for exporting our state, if we use a generic term for that. As you can see, a metric is basically a timestamp, a key, and a value. And modern systems add tags to that, but it's fairly terse. And a log, on the other hand, is a fairly verbose event description. As you can see in the numbers below those, the amount of storage and capacity, resources, whatever, required to process all that data is quite different. Metrics only requires 3.5 terabytes on 4 machines, and Elasticsearch, our logging cluster, requires just a lot more. So monitoring on logs could be a lot more heavier than monitoring on metrics, so that's why we generally monitor on metrics where we can. Another thing is quite confusing in this company is when we talk about health. Some people think that their application is healthy because the self-diagnose page says it's healthy. But these checks are basically checks made by a developer just to test the dependencies and so on and so on. But what is health basically? A load balancer. If a load balancer sees a piece of software and it wants to know, can I put you into my load balancer behind a virtual IP address, it has to understand if the application is healthy or not. Well, self-diagnose page could be used for that. But on the other hand, if you would have some extra logic where you would basically say that an application that is unhealthy, because the self-diagnose page has a check which does not succeed, let's turn off the software. Well, you can't do that because the dependency, you don't control the dependency. You have no idea what's going on with the dependencies. So you cannot just have a self-diagnose page which looks at the landscape and determines if it's healthy or not. That just doesn't work. So the effort that we did in the past to provide checks based on this self-diagnose page is a nice effort, fairly well done, but probably not quite what we want to model our checks on in the future. So from the industry, I guess Google uses this quite a lot. Maybe they even were the first to use it, to coin the phrase. A service level indicator is basically a metric that is representative of a major function of your software. So say I create some software that processes documents, and I output a metric which tells me how much I'm processing per second. That would be a great key service level indicator. And basically, I would want some alerting on that, which is basically a service level objective. These terms, I don't think we use them at Bol.com at all, but it's a nice way, I guess, to like speak the same language as the industry. It's also a nice way to actually say that we are looking at our software and we are looking for ways, we're looking for what kind of metrics are really, really important about that software. We can't just say, let's just monitor everything. Let's monitor all the metrics. Let's just create a baseline for everything and let's just monitor that. You can't do that. That's why you need an indicator and an objective. So we can't talk about alerting without thinking about Bol.com, or rather thinking about being in a company that's as big as this, as complex as this. Because creating monitoring and alerting for a small startup with 5 people and 1 application is obviously completely different than what we do here. So let's talk about context for a bit. Context applies, I guess, in 2 areas. We have people with different knowledge, and we have people with different responsibilities. We have Scrum teams who are responsible for a few applications. We have SRTs who are responsible for an entire space. We have Tim, who can be responsible for an entire field or specialism, like compute or whatever. And we also have a problem with continuity, and that is that we do not have the luxury of giving our developers a standby shift 24/7. That would be great. I'm not sure if you agree, but that would be a great thing for the company, I would say. But it costs a lot of money, so we don't do that. And obviously, teams are dynamic, knowledge changes, team members leave, and so on and so on. So when you think about learning, you also have to consider these dynamics. Now, this is not to say that we're not doing a good job, but this is what I'm stating here. I guess could be a bit dubious. But what we have done the past years is basically the SRTs and TAM middleware, Tim, and all the good engineers have looked for ways to monitor the stack, and they've done it in a very traditional way. Let's just skip that. I wanted to ask a question about that. Anyway. So what we found is that when we look at how many checks were created by us, because I'm a middleware guy as well, I guess, Scrum Team 1B, for example, has 714 unique checks. I'm pretty sure that no one in the team has an idea of what those 90% of those checks are. Equally, an engineer on duty for middleware, which is basically a standby shift for all our SRT spaces in one go, except the platform SRT, can receive a total of 29,770 unique alerts in their shift. That's quite a bit. How do you explain that? What does that mean to Bol.com money-wise? That cannot be. It cannot be that we have all these checks and it actually means someone has to be woken up at night, because if they do not wake up at night, it would cost Bol.com money. If we look at 1 day of alerts, this is just 1 day. Oh, by the way, these are just production notifications. There are obviously monitoring checks for other environments, so you just multiply by the amount of environments. 1 day, we get this amount of alerts, 303 alerts. I just picked a random day. I have no idea if that was a special day or whatever, but a random day. So 303 times someone receives a pager, an email, an SMS, that something was broken. They had to intervene, or at least that was what you expect from an alert. But the reason why we're here, the reason why we have reached an environment where we have so many alerts, where people basically just don't know what they're dealing with, or basically just don't know what all these alerts are there for, because there's some history behind it, because a different team created it, and so on and so on, is because we lack some best practices. We could blame people for that, but it's just not a sexy field where all the knowledge is present online, where people can just Google, how do I create my alerts? What am I going to do when I create an alert? How do I see if it's valid for me? So let's talk about a few best practices. They've been coined by Google, some other big companies as well, so they should be good enough for us. When you alert on something, or when you want to alert on something, you generally respond to an incident. Something breaks, and you figure, it broke because an exception happened there and there. And then your gut response would be, all right, let's create an alert for that. The problem with doing that is that you would create an alert for each and every tiny different exception that you would receive. You have various other circumstances, and you just end up with a huge amount of alerts. Instead, what people have found out is it's much better just to look at symptoms instead. Because a symptom is basically something that the user of your service, the user of your software, will notice. For example, latency. Your service is slow, or your batch processing is slow. The response codes are wrong. It's not 200. Or the response body is wrong. Alerting on symptoms allows you to avoid creating an alert for each and every special situation that you encounter in your career, which you think would be a great idea to catch. Google has also thought about what kind of symptoms would be great to look at. These are a few of those. Well, actually, these are all 4 of those. I believe another big company has a 5th one. I didn't include that here, because I believe this is a great starting point for us. So latency, I talked about that. When you alert on latency, definitely make a differentiation between successful requests and unsuccessful requests. Because if you fail to do that, you would have a very skewed average. I mean, you'd be sending out exceptions like within milliseconds, whereas maybe your site is only serving a few 200s, and voila, your average is brilliant. It's a few milliseconds. Traffic, how much demand is placed on your service, or even your batch processing, how much work are you actually doing, how much are you progressing in the task that you wrote software for. Great thing to alert on. The rate of failure, obviously, is a great thing to alert on, so don't alert on specific exceptions, but look at what kind of ratio of exceptions am I generating. And saturation, how full is your service? So when you deploy when you write software, understand the limits of that software, understand how far you can scale, and do that, and define a threshold that you just don't want to pass, which would be unreasonable to pass without having to do other scaling, which would be required at that point in time. Another thing to think about when you create alerts is that they should be simple. They shouldn't depend on 15 things, because if they're not simple, things will break. They should be urgent, as in you shouldn't use alerting just to inform someone. Just inform yourself that something is kind of off. Let's look the next day, the following work day. or let's just look in an hour. That just doesn't make any sense, because an alert comes in, it diverts your focus, and just ruins your workday. Well, it can ruin your evening, that's for sure. They should be actionable. That makes sense, right? You're not going to create something, an alert, and you receive it, and you won't be able to understand what you have to do at that point in time. You have to create an alert that will actually require you to take some action. It shouldn't auto-recover. Something that we experience a lot with these 30,000 checks on the middleware shift is that, oh yeah, it auto-recovered. 2 minutes ago, it auto-recovered, didn't do anything. Basically, that's we report all these every week to each other, and that's just one running story that we just keeps on going on and on and on. Yeah, it auto-recovered. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And finally, it should require human interaction, intervention, because if you can automate it, why on earth would you want to alert on it? So I restarted the service. Well, maybe you could have automated that. Might not always be a good idea, but... So after you receive an alert, what do? We have a ton of dashboards, obviously. You could use those dashboards, and you can create all these nifty graphs and try to understand what went wrong. Instead, I would like to advise you to first mitigate the problem. You do not want your users continue to have an issue while you are figuring out what's going wrong. This makes sense. But when you look at the practice, look at what people are doing, they generally just stick onto the problem. They just keep on typing, keep on looking for ways to solve it without actually thinking about serving the users first. You might have a service where you might think that, well, I can't really mitigate this. I would like to encourage you to develop software with that in mind, with being able to mitigate problems in your service in mind. Secondly, you want an escalation time. You don't want to be stuck on that problem for an hour and just forget time and just do this other thing, test this, test that. I know I've been stuck in those kind of situations myself as well. It's so easy just to continue working on something because you feel like you're so close to finding a solution. Define a period for yourself before you call up your manager, say, all right, I need some help with this. Let's fly in some guys and wake up some guys and let them help me on the problem. Dashboarding, you don't want to be creating these at the moment you have a problem. So look at your service level indicators, these key metrics. Create a dashboard out of them so you can just understand right away, okay, so this key metric fell down or went through the roof. I need to look at this. And, oh, this metric went down as well. Wow, what are we going to do with that? Have these before the problem occurs. That makes sense, but I know that some people just have dashboards full of graphs where you basically just don't understand what's going on anymore. No, start off with your service level indicators first. Link to other dashboards for drill down. If you have the time, please think about how you would drill down certain situations and create extra dashboards which are linked to from your service level indicator. That would save you a lot of time when troubleshooting. Logs, use that for an audit trail. Some people wonder what they use logging for. Why should they use logging? Should I just store metrics in logging? Because you can extract that from logs as well. Efficiency was a problem, as we saw. However, I would just advise you to use logging as an audit trail. So when you have, well, not as an audit trail, but as a way to see exactly what happened. It's very verbose. You can store a lot of information there, so you can hopefully track the entire flow of an issue. And then just use any other tool to investigate. I have no recommendations for that. Future of Insights at Broadcom. As I said, we have inherited the monitoring solution, and obviously we have some ideas how to move this forward. Starting off, we'll be separating alerting and monitoring because we see that we need more control. We need more control out of the way people are notified, how teams are assembled, and how they are informed. So, for example, instead of sending an alert to one person, you might want to send to everyone in your team, or within certain hours, you don't want to send it to this guy because he's on vacation, or he's taking his kids to kindergarten, whatever. We want to improve self-service monitoring. At the moment, we don't see many developers creating their own alerts. We definitely want you guys to do that. There are instructions on Confluence to do so, but yeah, we want to improve that and make that better. I do encourage you, obviously, to follow those instructions after this talk. Look at your key level indicators, service level indicators, and create a threshold, create an objective using a monitoring check. Focus on metrics-based alerting. We're going to continue doing that because at the moment the traditional monitoring system that we have is based on scripts, just basically running some arbitrary code and exiting with a certain exit code and then understanding if that was healthy or not. That's not a very nice contract with developers. We would like you to be able to create metrics in your application and then create alerts on those metrics. And finally, at some point, we want to introduce distributed tracing. No promises on that. It's been in the works for a long, long time, but it's a fairly complicated thing to standardize on. Q&A.
All right. Any questions?
Yeah, you've been talking about having good metrics. Well, one of the problems we are facing a lot is that the value of what determines what is a good value, it's also dependent upon time, because in the middle of the night we don't have any traffic, and that's okay. But during the day, if you don't have any traffic, that will be a problem. So how do you suggest solving those problems?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I definitely believe that because we're a retail site, our traffic patterns are very different than in the middle of the night and during the day. The solution that we have now does not support time, basically, but that's definitely a much requested feature, so we will definitely consider that. To start with, I would at least start with a minimum baseline, I guess. If you at least have some traffic, use that as the baseline. Look at your minimum and then use that, use those error thresholds, and so on and so on. But I do completely understand your problem there. We'll get back to you on that, basically, at some point this time in this year. Anyone else?
Yes, I have a question regarding the cloud. We see that moving from Oracle to Postgres and AQ to Box in our team, we will be relying on our own alerts instead of the free alerts we get for Oracle, like your queue size is too high, it's stalling, etc. So we're going to get some experience there, creating our own metrics. And then we will go to the cloud. Are you already working on some proof of concepts with that?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm part of the cloud monitoring metrics and alerting circle. And I guess you want to hear some names of tools, right? Yeah, I bet you do. All right, so Nagios for a monitoring solution is kind of old. We realize that. We don't want to continue using that. Prometheus seems to be the industry standard nowadays when you look at Google Cloud and all other cloud setups. So that's definitely something that we will be introducing, bearing any blockers. Metrics is a bigger problem, so you would think Prometheus and metrics, although they go hand in hand. But Prometheus is not a long-term storage solution for metrics. So we're still working on that, and we're looking at tools like InfluxDB, OpenTSDB. Basically, existing Grafana backends. I'm missing anything? Logging, Elk, the Elasticsearch, Logstash, and the Kibana stack. Does that answer your question? Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Wait.
Sorry, I missed. Sorry about that. I'm too anxious to get off the stage. Sorry.
Last question.
All right. I would have two questions, if that's okay. Quick, hopefully to answer. One is, do you have the notion of like error budgets within Bol, where you basically define like if a service runs out of this error budget, you invest more in stabilizing the service versus innovating?
Yeah. So we definitely do not. There is very little structure around the way that we interact with our Scrum teams, which is definitely something we should be working on. So no, we do not have a way to like balance things out in order to avoid engineer on duty fatigue and so on and so on. But that's something we, well, at least the monitoring team is aware of. But that would require some very big changes in the way of the way we work, basically.
Yeah, I think the change what you explained to going to SLIs and SLOs helps you with that, definitely. And a second quick question is like, how do you deal with when you have like failures in your service? Like, do you do like postmortems where what went wrong? How can like my peers learn from what was done wrong? How can I like basically do things better the next time?
Yeah. Yeah, we have them basically. Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.